Hello, fellow Texans, and welcome to this episode of The Mandate. I'm your host, Byron Henry, and as you know, here we talk about the intersection of law and politics in the Lone Star State. I'm excited today because we have a very special guest, candidate for House District 70, the Republican candidate running for office. And in a minute, we'll get to visit with him about some of the important things going on in Texas politics, Collin County, his campaign, and what's at stake for the state of Texas in this election. First, I'd like to address kind of where we are in the state of politics, Texas, but really American politics at this time. And I'll pine for a minute of the good old days when Republicans and Democrats, conservatives and liberals could argue about policy. They were honest about it. One side wanted less government, less regulation. The other side believed government was the answer. They wanted higher taxes, more regulation, a little bit more control over people's lives to better order society. Always for the good, obviously, of the people back then. Today, we're in a different place. And after the Democratic National Convention and just seeing the run-up, and the reason I'm addressing it from American versus Texas is because the legacy media is involved, and that is really a national issue and not just a Texas issue. So where we are today is basically a place where it doesn't really matter what you believe. The Democratic Party, they are not going to admit the actual policies they want to enact. Joe Biden did not get out there. Well, he didn't get out at all. He was in his basement for an entire campaign. Did not say he wanted to open the border. He did not say he wanted to get rid of President Trump's corporate tax cut or the tax cut for the middle class. He didn't say that he was for abortion on demand. Everybody knew Joe Biden had been in government for basically his entire life and made his money from the taxpayers his whole life and his whole career. But they considered him a governing moderate, a person who would just go along, and he had friends on the Hill and friends in Washington. Well, that wasn't really the case. That's not the way he governed. And we should have known that from the beginning. But of course, today, they will not be honest. Kamala Harris is now adopting President Trump's policies, running ads with the border wall in the background, saying she doesn't want to decriminalize border crossings. She doesn't want to take away private health care, or health insurance, doesn't want to confiscate guns. All of these are documented video recordings of her taking these positions, both when she was campaigning for president in 2020 and since then while she's been vice president. They are actively saying that they are not for any of these things. So that would make you wonder, why would a Democrat vote for Harris if she's not for mandatory gun buybacks or getting rid of private health insurance in favor of a government one-size-fits-all taxpayer boondoggle? It begs the question, why can't they just be honest? If they believe immigration is good for the country, they believe our borders should be open, they believe our taxes should be higher, they believe abortion should be available up until the minute of birth, they believe the public school system is the answer to the world's problems, they should be honest and say so. There is a sizable group of people in this country that believe that follow that. They are progressives, and that is a large percentage of the population. The problem is that percentage would never win an election, either nationally or locally. And so therefore they've resorted to basically saying that President Trump's invoking the Project 2025, he disavowed it. Wants to ban abortion. He said he's not for a national abortion ban. It's a state-by-state issue. Basically, they're adopting his no tax on tips policy, by the way, which the media mocked when it came out. And there was actually an ad saying no tax on tips would cost the government this much money. So they were actually trying to run down the plan. And then, of course, they back that up as soon as Kamala Harris says, I want to do the same thing, no tax on tips. So what I expect is for them to basically take moderate to right-leaning positions, populist positions borrowed from President Trump, not to disagree with anything at the debate. And basically what's going to happen is that Harris is going to be allowed to take positions that she has never held or never vocally espoused in any campaign or while she was in office at the debate, and distance herself from all of those things, even though that's what she believes. And the minute she gets into office, let's all be clear about this. It happened with Joe Biden. It's going to happen with Harris. If she gets into office, every single thing President Trump and Republicans are accusing her of being for, she's going to implement if she can. So we need to stop pretending, stop getting our information from legacy media because they are in on it. They will cover the tracks of Vice President Harris. They're part of the conspiracy. They know that she is unelectable without their help. And our job, our mission is to get the truth out through non-legacy media sources, podcasts, on X, which is truly a free speech platform now and not subject to government pressured censorship, as Zuckerberg just admitted. And so the only way is to spread the information about the campaign outside the confines of the legacy media, or the average voter, who I saw a recent poll that the average voter, 86% of Democrats did not know that Kamala Harris was for abolishing ICE. So her own voters don't even know what she's for, and she would lose a number of those if they did. So our mission is to speak the truth, talk about the issues, have an honest debate about what's better for America. Is open borders better? Is it more secure? Is it safer? Is it better for the economy? Are lower taxes, less regulation? Do we want to live in a country with decriminalized drugs, with everyone turning us into Denver, Colorado, or San Francisco, California? Price controls like in a communist state? Do we want that, or do we want the vision of the Republican Party, which includes a lot of conservative issues such as low taxes, state control of a lot of items, state-by-state abortion regulations, protecting the life of the unborn, just so many things that Republicans and conservatives stand for that no one disputes. The question is that we can't allow the other side to borrow those ideals from our party just for 4 or 5 months running up to an election and then govern so far left that this country becomes unrecognizable in 4 years. So let's keep up the hard work. We have a few months until the election. We need to spread the word, get the word out to everyone about the differences between the visions for America that President Trump and Vice President Harris bring to America. And I think if that is done in any substantial amount, I don't see how Harris can win the election. But if they're allowed to cover up for her and pretend like she's just a prosecutor from California who's for the rule of law and she's moderate and she just wants what's best for the kids and for the country, that mantra, then it's going to be a long slog through and into November, and we can't let that happen. So now that I can get off my soapbox about where we are in American politics, I'm super excited today to have the Republican candidate for House District 70, which covers a part of Collin County where I'm from. He's not in my district, but he's a neighboring district, and I'm very excited to have Steve Kinard here with me today. He's the Republican nominee for HD 70, won a hard-fought primary campaign to become the candidate, and we're going to get to know him today, find out a little bit about Steve, his background, his campaign, and why voters should choose him for HD 70. So welcome to the
Thanks
mandate,
so much.
Steve.
Thanks for having me on, Byron. Glad to be here.
Just to get started, give the listeners an idea of your background. Where do you come from? Who is Steve Kinard, and what are you doing here?
Sure. So I was born just a few miles from where we're sitting right here in Dallas. Raised here. This has always been home. Went to Texas A&M undergrad. And then I lived abroad in my mother's native country, which is Panama. And so I have a bit of an interesting background in that regard, in that I'm a 6th-generation Texan on my dad's side. And I'm proud to be the son of a legal immigrant. My mom earned a scholarship to come and study here. And that's always kind of shaped my view on the promise of America and what makes this country great in that regard. And as I said, this has always been home to me. I lived for a time in Panama, then Washington, D.C., where I got an MBA there and worked in banking for a while. Moved to Houston. I was an entrepreneur in the oil and gas industry, which I'm very proud of. It's a critical industry for our state, for our nation. And I'll tell you what I saw there is this attack from the government on different industries that get disparate treatment. And that's where I really started to realize that if you're not engaged in the political process, you create a void, and you probably won't like how the government fills that void. And that started really to change my outlook. We had an opportunity to move back what I've always considered home, Dallas, in 2019 through a banking job that I got. And we really started to put down roots here for the long term. 2 of my 3 kids were born in Collin County. And so Collin County is home now. And I'll tell you, through the couple of years that we lived of the pandemic is really when I changed my outlook around kind of my role and what I wanted to do in my community. I think of myself, and I still think of myself, as an entrepreneur and a father. That's kind of the mindset that I bring to this race, and really how I think of myself. I really never imagined that I'd be a politician or be doing this, but we found ourselves, my family, in a position where we felt strongly, you can't complain if you're not in the arena. And I think it is important to speak up when the direction that we're headed in this country and in our community with the current representation is frankly unacceptable. And I'll tell you this, I joked a little bit even with my wife. I said, look, I'm not a politician by background. I don't have a campaign manager. I don't have millions of dollars or anything like that. But I do have a conviction that parents have a right to raise their kids without interference from the government, and that we should be a free and prosperous state that relies on a private economy and private innovation and private property. And I said, we need to stand up for these values and speak unequivocally around that and let the chips fall where they may. And then lo and behold, after a number of months, this is a complete grassroots movement, just meeting in coffee shops with people, looking them in the eye, hearing them out, listening to their concerns. And we were blessed to win the primary decisively by almost 40 points. And so here we are in a general election in what is the most competitive race in the state. There's 192,000 people in House District 70, and this election was decided by less than 900 votes 2 years ago. And I see that excitement in the grassroots and in our communities. I go knocking doors where it is rare in politics today, just with the way that districts are drawn, frankly, that your vote has such a huge impact, a decisive impact on the outcome of an election, where literally just reaching out to your neighbor or the person next to you in the pew and saying, hey, are you aware of what's going on? Let me talk to you about this. It is going to come down to that last vote, really, of just us in our community talking to each other. And that's why I'm not worried about however many millions of dollars is raised to attack us or to spread lies. I know when I go around and talk to people in Collin County, they want to change.
Well, speaking of your campaign, tell us a little bit about the primary. This was kind of a wild primary in Texas this run. We had a lot of warring factions. We had some grassroots candidates, some other more established candidates that some had governor backing, some had Speaker Phelan backing, and it seems to me there was sort of a major civil war if you look back in history, but in real terms, with respect to the number of representatives, it was small. It was a small group of 20% of the Republican caucus. It's basically going to turn over with what it appears are more conservative replacements, which was a minor a tidal wave, tsunami, whatever, inside the party. So tell me about what it was like in the primary, running amidst what was going on both here in Collin County and statewide in the Republican primary this term.
Well, I think you characterize it accurately in terms of tidal wave, disruption. I mean, it was a wild ride, to be honest with you. In our case, my situation was somewhat different in that, in my race, we were all kind of new to the scene. So there wasn't sort of a preconceived notion of where we stood on various and different issues. But what I found was that there is a clear and consistent call from the people, certainly in my district, that says the status quo is unacceptable. And we need to have reform and bold leadership that delivers results. And I want to give you just a concrete example that I think has really resonated with the people in my district. Sure. I was proud to be endorsed by Senator Angela Paxton. And in the last legislature, she had an amendment to the Constitution, Senate Concurrent Resolution 25, which, in my opinion, is just common sense. And it just established that parents have the right to make more moral, religious, and medical decisions for their children without interference from the government. That passed the Senate with broad bipartisan support. Most Democrats supported it, as they should. I didn't think that this was a controversial issue, and yet we didn't get a hearing on that in the House of Representatives. And look, in my opinion, as a father raising three young kids, if we can't align and be clear around the role of parents and empowering families in our community, everything downstream of that is going to be corrupted. And so I just want people to know I'm running first and foremost as a father, as an entrepreneur, and I want to stand up unequivocally for those values. And when we see that kind of lack of alignment, we have to make a change. We have to rally around saying something has to be reformed here. Something's not right. And I've seen that consistently in my district. That's why we won the primary, really on a message of unifying around reform and bold leadership in Austin, making Texas the center of liberty in the United States. We shouldn't be following any other state. We should be leading here as what every other state emulates when it comes to being the most free and prosperous society.
Yeah, and there's been a few things that have happened over the last few years that really drove regular people, business people, entrepreneurs, mothers, fathers into the political. First, you had COVID.
That's right.
And what happened during COVID, the lockdowns, the firings if you wouldn't get vaccinated.
That's right.
Just the overreach that we now know, all the conspiracy theorists that everyone was labeled and censored on all the social media platforms.
Conspiracies that were all true.
That ended up actually now they're all slowly but surely
That's right.
admitting that was mostly or completely true,
Yeah.
and the so-called conspiracy theorists. But then you had this last session sort of a confluence of events between the governor and the Senate pushing school choice.
Yeah.
And the impeachment of Attorney General Ken Paxton. So between Governor Abbott's key, basically issue, he wanted school choice passed, and the impeachment of Ken Paxton, you basically had a lot of people come out because of that. So a lot of people came out about the impeachment issue, about their reps voting for that, and this whole cockamamie thing where they cooked it up over Memorial Day weekend without any notice or to the public and tried to hide it so the grassroots couldn't get involved on the front end. Obviously, the grassroots got involved in big time on the back end, and we're still feeling that. But
Very
then
much
you
so.
also had Governor Abbott, and Governor Greg Abbott has called out your race and specifically said that this is an important race, and he's taken a distinct interest in that race and is supporting you in this race in House District 70. So you had those dynamics. And so let's take the second one first on the school choice issue. You talk about parental rights. You talk about the parents' ability to raise their kids, their children, and make the medical decisions and other decisions, religious decisions, moral decisions. The elephant in the room after the speaker's vote, which obviously this is all goes part and parcel, but the elephant in the room is the speaker's vote.
Yep.
Who's going to be Speaker of the House and we'll talk about that in a minute. But the next issue is what gets done vis-a-vis school choice, because there's a feeling that there won't be anything moving much, maybe not even a budget, until we have a deal on the governor's key issue of school choice. So tell me what does school choice mean to you, and how do you see it playing out, and what is your goal? What do you want what do you want to tell your voters that you're for with respect to school choice?
Well, look, this is a top issue that I hear all the time, knocking doors in the district. And I am a consistent and very vocal proponent for empowering families. And a big part of that is school choice. But I want to take a minute to step back and say, what are we really talking about here? What is the nature of this debate? And I think the important way to characterize that is centralization versus decentralization. I think a lot of the ills that we see in our economy and in our country are a result over time of consistent centralization of power and bureaucracy in Washington and in Austin. And the biggest investment that we make as a state is in education. And so everybody has an interest in this. This affects everybody. Of course, parents are often at the center of that, as it should be. But this is something that is the top investment we make, and I think it really identifies us as are you moving towards decentralization and empowering the citizenry, or greater bureaucracy? I don't think there's any debate. In the past couple of decades, we've seen a consistent growth in administrative costs and bureaucracy in the education system. And so for me, what this is fundamentally about is improving the way that we invest in education. And here's something I want to say very clearly to the people of Collin County. I often see a mischaracterization, which is that this is about defunding a particular school system or stripping funding away from our local schools. This is about increasing investment in education across the board. This is about empowering families. And by the way, I'm not aware of any situation where you bring more optionality and competition to any kind of service, and it gets worse, it gets better. And this is about empowering families to pursue that best choice. And by the way, I think a lot of school districts will see their funding increase, and they should if that local community chooses that school district. This is not about choosing the funding for any particular solution. it is about empowering the families and decentralizing the way that we make this investment. I am a strong proponent for increasing that investment and funding in education. We must do that. We have experienced a lot of inflation, and we need to not just match that, but continue to increase that investment in education. And that's how we're going to be able to get teachers' pay up. We reduce this administrative burden, this bureaucratic burden, and allow for more innovation in the local community to determine that. That's what this is all about. We get caught up in the image that people get with whether it's school choice or the favorite terminology of my opponent, the voucher scam. We're not even talking about vouchers here. We're talking about an education savings account that empowers people to make that investment in the local community. And I would just encourage everyone to realize that you don't vote against your own personal interest. Nobody goes and says, I'd prefer to buy a car from Ford and I will forsake all other car brands for the rest of my life. Having options is always a benefit. It's a good thing. That's what we're trying to deliver for families. And as I talk through that with people in the district, there is an alignment around a recognition of we have got to put families back at the center of our investment in education.
I've always found it odd that the proponents of public education as a system, obviously we have, the Constitution requires us to provide a free public education. As you said, it's the largest line item in the state budget. The biggest investment we make is in public education. But they assume that once given the choice, whether it's in Frisco or North Dallas or Plano or Richardson, wherever it is in Collin or North Dallas County, that people will choose to leave their public schools. And the way you put it with Ford is like, we can't allow anyone else to build cars other than Ford because people might buy them. That is the worst argument for a system that you could make. In other words, saying that if people just had a choice, they'd make a different one. I'm not sure that's the case. Children are different. Like, I'm always amazed at families. You talk about parental rights and empowerment, that for our children, every child is different. They all have specific needs, specific learning, the ways they learn best. And so we try to customize that.
Right.
Like, we send our children to the camps we choose in the summer. Sure. We do everything, what they wear, what they eat, everything has preference. But for some reason, in the one thing parents, one of the most important things we provide for our children is an education, the idea is that one choice fits every single child perfectly.
Right.
Like, it's as diverse as families are, as diverse as districts are, as diverse as children are. And you have three. I only had one, so I didn't have a diversity. I had one. But it just amazes me that they think that a one-size-fits-all approach, whether it's in any industry, would be best for parents. And I'm certainly glad to hear you explain it that way, because from what I understand, both the governor, the Senate, and the House members that have discussed this issue are for more funding across the board to education generally.
Absolutely.
Public or educational savings account per student funding will increase under any plan.
There is total alignment on that goal. And that is the nature of frankly, the lie that's being spread here. And let me say this, when you have a neighbor that makes a sacrifice to send their kid to a private school, nobody accuses them of defunding the public school by making that sacrifice to choose to send their kid to a different school. I've never heard that, at least. We all know that for any number of reasons, as you said, a family may determine that a different option is best for them, and all of us recognize that's a good thing. And then yet we get twisted into just a false kind of narrative that you must be, in terms of legislation, you must be either for or against this school district, this system, this particular type of curriculum. And this is simply not the case. We're talking about increasing investment in education for everybody and improving the results for everyone by allowing for a marketplace of ideas instead of a centralized kind of top-down approach from whether it be Austin or Washington. I think that overwhelmingly the people in House District 70 and frankly Texas recognize that that is a benefit to them. And that's what we're going to deliver in this next session.
Well, that's very good to hear. I like your optimism on that. Turning what's related to obviously public school and education funding across the board is property taxes. And there was a property tax cut last session.
That's right.
The comptroller, Glenn Hager, has said we have another surplus.
That's right.
And it's probably between 20 and 30 billion. I don't remember the exact number I was listening to a podcast where he was discussing the upcoming surplus, and I've heard a few representatives start with, how much should property tax be? Well, whatever it is, whatever the surplus is. But I want to get your view on the way the Texas economy is working right now. It's producing surpluses. What do you think budget-wise for property tax relief and homeowners if we're going to keep the property tax? I know there's a whole other line of thinking where eliminating the property tax is being studied.
Yeah.
It's being looked at for possibilities to fund things and how would we do it and what kind of taxes and what kind of funding we would use financing if we didn't have property tax. But right now in reality, we have a property tax. It is severely burdensome for some people. Mm-hmm. It is basically a semblance of an unrealized gains tax that conservatives are almost unanimously opposed to, that Vice President Harris has put out there, that this unrealized gains tax, where if you see a false gain, you have to pay taxes on it, even if it would later go down or whatnot. We kind of do that with our property taxes right now. So I just want to get your view on property taxes in general, how we fund education in the government, and also what do you see for this session with respect to some relief for some homeowners, especially in Collin County, where the home values have been going up consistently for the last decade.
Look, this is a huge and central issue in our state right now. And I think there's an interesting dynamic going on here where there's a clear alignment that we expect continued surpluses because we're blessed with a booming economy, which is part of what Texas is all about. We had a substantial tax cut in the last session that I believe passed unanimously or close to unanimous. But then there's an important distinction that we have to make here and that I want to make sure that people understand. We have to make a clear commitment to the people in our districts, and I do, that when we have continuous surpluses, we are always going to take a majority of that and allocate it to reduce this property tax burden. Because here's what's going on, and people know this. You get a cut, but the appraisal goes up and you end up in a wash situation, or even with the tax increasing over time. And so it's like short-term relief, but long-term renting from the government, basically, or the unrealized capital gains, which I hadn't heard that, but that's another way to think of it. We need to recognize that in the long term, philosophically, we should commit to eliminating that if and when we can. As you mentioned, the studies continue, but I want to make sure people understand there is a difference here between myself and my opponent, where is there going to be a tax cut next time and Republicans and Democrats will vote for it? Yeah, there's going to be. But my commitment frankly, as a businessman by background, is that if you don't know what your tax bill is going to be with all of this appraisal moving up and down, that's an unacceptable situation for Texans to find themselves in, renting from the government forever. And there's another piece of this too, particularly as it pertains to Collin County and Plano ISD. And that's with the largest piece of that property tax bill, which is your maintenance and operations tax for the school district, your M&O. And I am a firm believer that as we see continued surpluses, we should focus all of our attention that we can to reduce that M&O piece and get it down to zero and eliminate that. And what that will also do is help us to end this really unfair practice that we call recapture right now. You can call it Robin Hood. I just call it socialist redistribution, where we have a situation where some districts have their local tax dollars that are supposed to be invested in that local community, stripped away through this recapture, centralized in the state, and then redistributed through different and various means that I think really lack transparency and accountability. And anybody that's running in a district that is being affected negatively by that recapture is going to say, well, I'm against it. Well, I think we have to go further than that and start to talk about real solutions. And so my commitment is to continue to use that surplus to reduce that M&O tax, eliminate that, end this recapture and allow our local community to invest in our schools. This is unacceptable, particularly in a Republican-led state, that we have this kind of centralized socialist redistribution system. And look, there are different areas where we need to make a targeted investment because those communities don't have the resources. And I do believe in lifting up all children and giving them an opportunity for that education. Let's have that discussion. The state should make that investment, but not through a kind of sleight of hand way of taking from this one, taking from another district, and depriving a local community of an opportunity to determine what kind of investment they want to make. Look, we have 4 schools that are closing in Plano ISD. Birth rates are down, demographics are changing, but at the end of the day, depriving the community of an ability to talk about how we invest in that school system is wrong. And that's a central piece of this property tax debate. If we don't eliminate that M&O and use our surpluses to commit to that, frankly, we're not talking about solutions. We're just rolling out different kinds of political platitudes. That's my commitment to the people of Collin County. We have got to work to eliminate these property taxes and continue to have that discussion. How do we make the investments we need to make with our booming economy in a way that is more transparent and doesn't create these radical disparities in treatment of different communities? And I am focused on that. I am committed to that. We are going to continue to target this tax relief, and that is a long-term solution, not just a kind of every 2 years we see what we get and then you get some money back. And that's where I want to make a stark difference in my approach to this.
Well, speaking of getting some money back, last year, I think the property tax cut finally was passed, I may be wrong, first or second special session.
Unacceptable.
So we had a surplus going in. Everybody knew it before the election. There was going to be a surplus from the controller's office, and for some reason there wasn't time to do a lot of things that conservatives and grassroots activists wanted done, including some of the legislative priorities of the party. But they had time to grow the size of government right off the bat. Mm-hmm. And so, from my perspective, it is unacceptable when there's a surplus that you spend a dime until you give money back to the taxpayer. But certainly the growth in government, that is not a conservative principle. A conservative principle is reducing government. And so I want to know your view on, one, just the growth of government in general, and the idea that you would grow government by passing a budget before you got around to deciding whether or not people should be able to send their children to the school of their choice or get a little bit of their hard-earned tax dollars back.
This goes back to the need for reform, for bold leadership here, and to get our priorities straight. It is unacceptable to go to a special session to determine whether or not the people of Texas deserve to have that surplus that their hard work in the economy is generating to provide that property tax relief. That needs to be at the top of the list. We don't need to be wasting time passing resolutions to name highways after whomever, all this different stuff that somehow is able to get passed before the end of the regular session. And then we have critical central needs that have to do with the property taxes. That's a top issue. And then again, as you point out, with our largest investment in education, that's at the top of the list. Look, I do think
they managed to impeach, ran through the first impeachment of a statewide official in a generation before the end of the session, but they couldn't decide what to do with the surplus.
So we can get that done in 2 days or however long it was, but we can't have a discussion around a critical central issue for the people in my district and in districts across the state. And so, look, I want to make a clear commitment that our priorities need to be straight, and the primary function of the legislature is to pass a budget and to make sure that the people of Texas know that we recognize that the budget surplus doesn't belong to the government. Go back to the debate here that I lay out, which is around centralization or decentralization. The mechanism through which we see the most centralization is money. You follow the dollar. The more money that the government appropriates to its centralized control, the worse off, frankly, local communities, entrepreneurs, small businesses are going to be. And so if we want to solve the issue, you deprive it of the fuel that is allowing that to take place. That's what the property tax cuts are about. It's got to be a top priority. And I do make this pledge to the people of Collin County. If we're going down a road where we're going to punt that to the end of the session, you are going to see me out on the floor saying no. I'm voting no against whatever it is. we're going to pass an amendment to whatever it is we're talking about that reorients us towards these critical issues that need to be first and top of mind in the legislature. And I know I'm not alone in that. There's definitely a reform-minded, movement going on here where we've got to do better as a state and speak clearly to the people in our communities and then deliver on that. And I am really looking forward to being a part of this new movement. I think we're going to have the surpluses consistently that we need in this booming economy to make a meaningful and really powerful change, frankly, in the way that we fund our government and allow for more freedom and prosperity by getting rid of this, as you put it, this unrealized capital gains tax that's going on.
Well, and certainly this is Texas fighting against the current with its economy and with its surplus, in spite of what the Biden-Harris administration has been doing, this inflation, basically an open border, just the leadership in Washington we're not benefiting from that economically here in Texas, but yet with bold Republican leadership and Governor Abbott at the helm, obviously Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick running the Senate, and then of course Ken Paxton, who basically it seems files a lawsuit against a new rule or executive order that comes out of the Biden administration, and successfully in most cases every day. That leadership seems to be making a difference. And so in spite of inflation, in spite of the border issues, in spite of the angst over the war in Russia, between Russia and Ukraine, and the unease in the Middle East and whatnot, and the market unease that's happening right now, you still have success here in Texas because, for the most part, we've maintained a free market, conservative Republican view of the way the economy should work. But that's not necessarily going to continue. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about these priorities, because legislative priorities and whatnot, it's a big deal. And the contract with Texas, I wanted to ask you about, because that seems to be, it gained a lot of momentum, got a lot of notoriety, a lot of big time names signed on to it. It's always been in my day that you had Representative Toth and Harrison and Schatzline and Tinderholt, a bunch of basically people crying in the wilderness. They're basically on an island, basically, and they were put out there, by the way, because of their opposition to some of the speaker and that crowd's policies and aligning with the Democrats on a lot of things. But it sounds to me like the numbers are growing. The numbers signed onto the contract are growing, and is substantial. You're part of that. Tell us a little bit about your vision, both your own and through the contract with Texas, vision for the Texas House of Representatives.
Yeah, so I do think that what we always have to commit to is representing our district and listening to the people in our district. And I have heard a consistent cry, frankly, to have a new breed of leadership and results, really, in the House of Representatives. I do have a number of friends that are part of the group that has come up with the contract for Texas, with Texas, and I don't disagree particularly with any of the precepts in that. But the approach I've taken is a focus in my race right now, in my district, and I think that as a part of that, it's important that I try to focus on the local campaign as opposed to a lot of different statements that are being circulated. But I do want to make 2 points very clear, because I have publicly signed on to 2 letters that I think are important for the voters to understand. The first is a commitment that we have made between, I think, 46 Republicans, that as a caucus, it is critical that we function in a way that abides by the caucus rules, and that includes not appointing Democrat chairs in the House of Representatives. And there's something I want to say about this, because we often get attacked as, well, this is extremist, it's hyper-partisan. Well, the first thing I say to that is, if that's your position as a Democrat, then you should orient that to Chuck Schumer in the U.S. Senate and tell him to appoint Ted Cruz to chair a committee. We know that's never going to happen. And so every caucus everywhere, and in many Democrat-led states, they function in the same way. That's the point of the caucus. You don't meet and then appoint people external to the caucus. It's not about this kind of hyper-partisanship discussion. It's about getting a group of people together around a list of priorities and delivering those results as a group. And that's what you have to do when you're working in a legislature with 150 members. So I am absolutely 100% committed to that. And I look forward to continuing to work alongside this group of reformers that are focused on changing the status quo. And that's what I want to highlight to people. the status quo has not been delivering the results that the people of House District 70 want. We've got to make a change there, and we have to rally around that. And so I will continue to work with that group of reformers, and I think that we're going to really have some tremendous results in the weeks ahead. The other thing I want to highlight is we had a tremendous moment of unity when there was an attack from the federal government on Title IX to weaponize that and essentially erase women's sports. And I did sign on to that letter because here's what I want to tell people. I refuse to raise my daughter in a society that is working to erase womanhood. Look, a vote for really any Democrat and my opponent is a vote for boys and girls sports. This is a common sense issue. I'm yet to speak to anybody that believes that that's appropriate. That's why we came together and signed this letter. We cannot allow that. We have to continue to push back against this agenda. And I will never allow men and women's spaces erasing womanhood. And frankly, I don't think you can pretend to represent the interests of women if you don't know how to define a woman. And we have to end this kind of insane debate that we're having around this issue. So I've signed on to that letter, and we need to continue to rally around that. I think in the coming weeks, we're going to have more discussion around what the leadership and the priorities of the House look like. I think that the message from many of the representatives and in the contract with Texas is an excellent way to communicate to people, this is what we promised to do, and we're going to deliver there. And we have to say as Republicans that when we come together and have a list of priorities, they have to mean something. We can't then say, well, yeah, we promised to do this, and then we just ran out of time. I mean, that isn't an acceptable explanation for what's going on. In politics, you're allowed to have a disagreement. Come out and make that case. But we can't continue, I think, to kind of obfuscate the reality of what's going on here. And that's what I'm committed to do, is to increase transparency through this effort, this reform effort.
And so a lot of the things that were priorities that got shielded in that Texas House, border security, more aggressive border security bill that came out of the Senate, election integrity was a pet peeve of the Democrats. And I'm not in the House, right? But I know when a bill comes from the Senate and you've got dozens of Republicans in the House wanting to bring up that bill, and the election integrity bill dies, it can't be anything other than that's a payoff, so to speak, to the Democrats that support the speaker and the chair committees and whatnot. When you have one of the biggest issues voters talk about, we got the border, we got election security. You just mentioned one of the cultural issues about gender and men and women's sports and defining a woman. You've also got the abortion issue, which is now at the state level, which, I think Texans have spoken pretty clearly through their legislators on how Texans feel about the abortion issue, which I think you disagree with your opponent on that. You've also got this whole legalizing mind-altering drugs, whether it's marijuana or others, or reducing penalties, which I think you also disagree with your opponent. We've got casino gambling. There's a group of Republicans and Democrats trying to bring casino-style gambling to Texas. Those are big cultural issues. So tell your voters, in addition to the budgetary issues and the way the House is made up and the school choice issue you've already discussed and parental rights, on those culture issues, if there is a difference, a distinction, what they are and why you're a better choice to represent them in HD 70.
Well, I'm going to add another priority to that list, which is banning taxpayer-funded lobbying. It is unacceptable that we have a situation where people are being deprived of their funds through taxes, and then that's redirected to hiring lobbying firms that actively work to undermine the interests of parents and local communities. And let me say this, to your point, that's passed numerous times now out of the Texas Senate. Mays Middleton has been a leader on this issue, and I don't believe that that's a uniquely Republican priority. I think it's a priority that is broadly supported by many Texans. I frankly am yet to find a single person that says, I would like to pay taxes to fund a lobbying firm. And so that's just an example of why these priorities are so important and why I'm inviting more and more people join the Republican Party, because we're fighting for common sense solutions to not misappropriate your public funds. But look, you're right as well. We have a situation where I think historically there's been some reticence within the party to engage on social issues that maybe the corporations don't want or the media disagrees on. And I'm going to tell you frankly, I reject that outright, because the driving force for me here, look, we've made a commitment in our family to homeschool our 3 kids. And one of the things that I tell people is, when I have an opportunity to represent you in Austin, we're moving down to Austin as a family. We're going to homeschool in the Capitol. When we're done with our legislative work for the day, I'm going home to my family. And when that session ends, we're moving back home to Collin County, where we belong as a family. And I think that's going to help to keep me rooted in terms of, what are we fighting for? What are we leaving behind to future generations? And if we capitulate on basic common sense issues of what a woman is, I don't think that we can say that we're leading on any other issue if we're going to sacrifice that. We have to stand firmly and say, we are not going to allow our society to live by a lie. And it is frankly a lie that it's acceptable for men to be in women's spaces. It is a lie that it is okay for for-profit entities to abort and kill full-term 9-month-old babies and then sell their body parts for profit, and then also use that to be funding political campaigns. That is not something that the people of Collin County want. I am absolutely confident of that. And we have just a basic effort to go out and educate people. I can tell you, most people, they don't know who their state representative is. And they certainly don't know in this district that it is the closest race, and that we are in a situation where we are determining largely the tone of how we're going to move forward as a state and as a country. And what's important to us, and I think we need to speak unequivocally that families are important to us, respecting and empowering families are important to us, and rebuking outright lies and immoral behavior is not something that's partisan or that should be kind of eschewed from the public square. Rather, we have a duty as citizens to require that be addressed, and that everybody take a stand on this. The people deserve to know. We've even seen a school district in Collin County recently that's trying to wave their arms and say, well, we can't pass a resolution as to whether boys are going to play in girls' sports. Other entities have said that that's not allowed or it is allowed. I don't care. Every elected official should be able to state unequivocally and boldly, no, I will never stand for boys playing in girls' sports. This is ridiculous that we have to continue to have this discussion. And that's, I think, the kind of change in tone that we're going to see in this next legislature with this reform movement, to say, yeah, we're a free and prosperous state, but we don't tolerate immorality and lies.
Well said. Well, I'm certainly looking forward to this session. Tell the viewers where they can get it, how to get in touch with you, or how they can get involved in your campaign.
I would love for anybody out there in Collin County particularly to be involved in the campaign. You can follow us at votestevekinard.com. You can follow us on X at KinardForTX. And what I'll tell people is, look, our effort is to invite people in a way that is fun and patriotic. You know, last night we had a pre-screening of the Reagan movie, which is about to come out, and it was packed. We were chanting USA, we were having fun, and that is the kind of energy that I want to bring to this campaign. I want to invite everybody, reach out to me. If you want to meet me, if you have questions, if you want to grab a coffee, that's what I'm all about. This is a grass movement. It's a pro-family, pro-America movement. VoteSteveKinard.com.
Thank you, Steve. Well, that makes me a little bit more optimistic, both for HD 70 and the upcoming session and the upcoming election. So it was really good to have you on today to really see your energy and also your understanding of the issues and what's facing Texans and your potential constituents in HD 70.
Thanks so much for having me on, Byron. And it's going to be a wild couple of months, but I know we are going to win. Collin County's ready for a change.
It is going to be a crazy ride. Well, I'd like to thank Real News PR, my producer Emilio, for making this happen. And just remember what Steve said and what I said in the intro about the truth. We're not going to stand for lies. Let's be honest about our differences. Let's resolve those differences the way they should be resolved in politics. And let's do what's best in the interest of truth and for the citizens of Collin County, Texas, and the country. Thanks again for joining us on this episode of The Mandate. And that's all we have this week. We're adjourned.